Welcome. I'm Anuja Amin, mother to two daughters, an educator, and a survivor. Today, we're going to talk about five five things nobody told you about child sexual abuse. Did you know that before they turn 18 years, one in two children experience some form of sexual abuse? And this statistic is for children in India, and girls and boys are equally vulnerable to child sexual abuse, right? So a lot of people believe that this can't happen in their home, in their family, in their neighborhood, and likely even in their town. And this is what many people believe until it happens. So at Circles of Safety, what is our goal? Our goal is to increase awareness, reduce the stigma, and increase engagement in the community so that we can prevent child sexual abuse. There are just so I read something, and I actually even heard this in a TED talk, that to bring about a real change in a person, an organization, or a culture, we need to start with an uncomfortable conversation. So today I invite you to a conversation on child sexual abuse. There are certain things that may be uncomfortable, but we need to know about it and we need to be aware. So let me start by talking a little about my journey. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. I have no problems sharing this. When I was I experienced several forms of abuse from about age 5 to 9 years, and then sporadic episodes continued until my teens. Today, it does not define me, but it sure has shaped me. And so I couldn't talk about this easily, and I decided that instead of staying silent, because it's the shame, guilt, and denial that helped this epidemic to grow. So I thought, why not use this as an opportunity to have courage, to be the voice for children in India and in the world who are abused every day. And so, let's have these conversations, and they're counting on this. They're counting for us to be here and talk about this. So thank you so much for being present. Thank you so much for making my mission possible. As a mother and a parent, I'm passionate about making sure that child sexual abuse ends with my generation and is not passed on to the next, which is my children, your children, our children, right? So let's get started, because the first thing that we need to do to make this a reality is to raise our collective awareness. We need to together understand and learn the facts. So I'm going to start by sharing fact one, which is sexual abuse is not limited to forced contact offenses. Many times in the media, rape and molestation cases come up, and they assume that force has been used to victimize a child. And although this is true in many cases, I want to talk about the other part, the other cases where this is not so obvious, and it force is not always a part of it, right? So I want to first talk about the range of behaviors that are included when we talk about child sexual abuse. It ranges right from contact, the obvious contact offenses like rape, molestation, penetration of the vagina, anal or even oral. It also includes fondling of a child's genitals. These are the obvious offenses. And then on the other end lie the not so obvious non-contact offenses. This can include anything from flashing or exposing genitals to showing a pornographic video, taking nude pictures of a child for sexual pleasure. Now the law, which is POCSO, the Protection of Children Against Sexual Offenses, also includes behaviors like eve teasing, cyberbullying, harassment, stalking somebody. All this is included, but as a community, we are not aware that all this is something that we need to be wary of. And I many women, most women have faced some form of, say, eve teasing, walking on the road, comments being passed, and we've minimized it and we've just said, this is a part of life, this happens, let's just ignore it, right? So the law has now brought this and included it in as part of sexual abuse. The other thing I want to highlight here is that understanding online safety is paramount today. Our children have access to devices, handheld devices, and it's through these devices that sexual predators are, taking full opportunity of the current situation and accessing and getting close to children. So I want to share a report that I read in the lockdown. Okay, this is very recent and it's quite disturbing. So just bear with me. I want to get the facts straight, so I may just check with the report. Also, it was published in the newspaper, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. What they do is they do an annual exercise where they urge people to report any child pornographic content or any child sexual abuse material that is available online. And this is something that's collected world over, globally, and they compile this report on an annual basis. And guess who topped the list, the most recent list? It was India. India came first. India came first with about 20 lakh, almost 20 lakh reports were filed from India. At number 2 was Pakistan and number 4 was Bangladesh. So they were also contemplating that there's something about this region, but why are the top, out of the top 4, 3 are in this region, right? So I just want you to understand that this is very prevalent. It's happening here. These are just reports of these things existing online. This does not include how many people downloaded them, how many people browsed for this content. All that is a whole other story. But I just want you to understand the gravity of the situation, and online safety is important. And so please be vigilant. The other thing that I want to highlight here, that children can experience trauma from the contact offenses and the non-contact offenses, because essentially it is the trust that they have placed in the adult that has been violated. Okay, this brings us to our next point. When we talk about the abusers, there is no checklist for sex offenders. There is no checklist for abusers. Right? What I mean by this is that, when I ask you what comes to your mind when you think of an abuser, there'll be a certain image that will appear, and today I want to debunk that image. I want us to reflect on what our notions are, what is causing it. There's a lot of media influence that builds this image in our head. I remember a couple of years back, I saw a government awareness video which showed, it was an awareness video about preventing child sexual abuse, and they showed that a family, parents and the child have gone to a common, like a municipal garden to play, and the parents are sitting on a bench, browsing on their phone, and the child is playing, and the child is a tall man in a dark, like in a black overcoat and a black head, approaches the child and tries to lure him with a chocolate. Now, this is a typical image that often we think of when we think of child sexual abuse. But I want to debunk this, that abusers are not these scary, sleazy characters that we often make them up to be, If they were that, I'll tell you, it'd be so simple. We could spot them a mile away. Imagine who wears a black overcoat in the heat and the humidity of India, no? I can't remember, except for a magician, somebody wearing a black hat. So I want you to, check what you think an abuser looks like, right? If they did look like that, it'd be so easy to keep our children away from them and keep that distance from these people, right? In fact, it's the normality and the diversity of abusers that makes them go undetected. They are friendly, they are charming, they are funny, and so it's so easy for them to do what they do. Here I also want to talk about a certain, just debunk very basic things about abusers. Research shows that abusers are mainly men, but women also are offenders. Another study also shows that one in three cases, the offender is in fact a juvenile. So we talk about adults abusing, we talk about stranger danger to the child, but we don't talk necessarily about the danger that maybe an older cousin, an older brother, or a sibling of a friend can pose, right? So we have to start talking about situations and behaviors that present a risk rather than individual characteristics. Before I talk about the situations and the behaviors, I want to quickly talk to you about a study. I'm really trying to make you understand that this is prevalent in India, and I don't want us to be complacent. So I want to talk to you about a study that I often refer to. It's done by RAHI, which is an NGO based in Delhi. It stands for Recovery and Healing from Incest. And what they did was in '96, they conducted the first study ever in child sexual abuse. And what they surveyed 600 English-speaking women from middle and upper middle class in living in urban cities. So again, debunking the myth here that it happens in villages, in certain socioeconomic levels. It happens everywhere. Okay, so when they surveyed these women, what did they find? 76% of these women had experienced some or the other form of sexual abuse in their childhood or adolescence. They were in their mid 40s, so even many years ago. For people who think it's an issue of today's generation with today's exposure, it's not. Out of the 76% of these women, 40% of the women experienced abuse at the hands of a family member, mostly an uncle or a cousin. So it's not something that's out there. In fact, it's something that happens right under our noses in our backyard. And so I want you to keep this in mind, right? So now that you know these facts about abusers, let's get to the situations and the behaviors that present a risk. So let's not look for individual characteristics. Let me list out some of, give you examples. Many organizations have, given different examples that I want to share some of them with you. So one could be that abusers find opportunities to get uninterrupted time with the children. So maybe taking them on long drives, filling in your babysitting needs, saying, no, you go ahead, I'll take care, I'll fill in for the child. Also sometimes taking them on special trips. So basically getting that one-on-one time with the child. Another thing that also they do is they ignore the child's verbal and physical cues when they are showing affection. So suppose they're saying, oh, come and sit on my lap, and the child doesn't want to, or they're hugging them or kissing them or wrestling with them or tickling them. These are very common things that happen at a family gathering or in a, and so at that time, if the child is showing that they don't want to be involved with that, they may ignore that, and they will just test how the child reacts, how everybody else is reacting to that. So that's another situation and a behavior that you can look out for. Something else is that they don't respect the child's privacy. So it can be times when they're in the bathroom or in the bedroom, if they're sleeping, walking in on them, etc. Is another thing that you can look out for. Sometimes they also discuss sexual experiences with the child, try and get close, understand their feelings. If it's a teenager, how are you feeling? Have you tried this? Have you done this? So trying to get close and understand what the child is feeling and experiencing. Sometimes what they also do, and this is also quite common actually, is they shower the child with gifts, making them feel very special. It could even be on no occasion at all. It doesn't have to be birthdays or Diwali or Eid for that to happen. It's just something that they do to make the child feel very special. So I've listed some of these behaviors. These are some of the flags, some of the things that you can look out for, right? This brings us to our next point. Abusers groom the victim and the family. The big misconception here is that it's about the child and the abuser, whereas the abuser gains the trust of the child and the family by methodically grooming them. The process is called grooming. Now, Matt Sandusky, in his book called Undaunted, explained this really well. So I just want to take that example. He said, if you want to, imagine if you put a frog in boiling hot water, what will he do? He'll do everything to escape. If you want to stew him in boiling hot water, he'll do everything to escape and jump out. But if you put a frog in cool water and then turn the temperature up bit by bit, then what happens? The unsuspecting frog, he will not realize what exactly is happening, and before he's already trapped. When the water is already boiling, he's trapped and he's stuck. And so grooming a child for sexual victimization is like raising the temperature of the water. So the unsuspecting child senses that something is off, something feels weird, but it's still not that intense for them to raise alarm or for them to get away from the situation or, basically stop it from happening. As things progress, before they even realize it has happened, they've already been victimized. So they feel such a strong sense of shame, embarrassment, guilt, and so they are not able to do anything about it. And so this essentially, I'm just with an example, metaphorically, I just want to explain what grooming is. To summarize, there are 4 stages of grooming, right? First stage is the abuser has to get access to the child. This is very important, that if the person who's the perpetrator is a family member or a known person, they already have access to the child. That is not a problem, right? But if it is somebody that is not known to the child, then how do they get access? They often target children who are uneducated about body safety, about good, unsafe touch and safe touch. They target children who have inattentive parents, or who, are troubled, who are insecure, who are shy, or they suffer from neglect from parents and even single parents, right? So these are some of the ways that they target their child. Then the second stage is gaining trust. Now, excuse me, to gain the trust, again, if it's a known person, it's not very difficult to gain trust. Otherwise, what they end up doing is they are so friendly, they're so helpful, and so they weave themselves into the child's life, and slowly weave themselves into the child's life and sort of make the child feel so special and make the child also invest in that relationship. So at the end of it, the child feels that they were as much a part of it, right? The third step here in the grooming process is breaking down boundaries. This is very, very important. I really want you to pay attention to this one, because this is where you can do something, right? So when I say breaking boundaries, what I mean is, you don't catch abusers abusing, you catch abusers breaking boundaries. What that means is they test a child's personal boundaries. So I gave you an example earlier about tickling, wrestling, etc. Imagine if it's a family gathering and the child is sitting in the person's lap, in a family member's lap, and they accidentally touch the genitals or something, and then they wait and they see, is the child responding? What is happening? If the child has noticed and they have told an adult, how did the adult respond? Did they show alarm? Did they believe the child? So that the abuser is sort of analyzing all these things, right? And so it's important for us to understand that this is the point when a child raises alarm or you notice something, then you have to intervene. This is where you can spot it and stop it. Okay, so remember this. Sometimes I've heard parents tell me in my workshops that it's not, it's very uncomfortable for us to say anything, इतना तो कुछ हुआ भी नहीं होगा, मतलब भूल से हो गया होगा, it's accidental, what can I do? And I tell you, this is my thumb rule, this is what I believe. Nobody and nobody's discomfort trumps my children's safety. right? This is my thumb rule. So I don't care if the other person feels uncomfortable, but if my child is not feeling okay, I'm going to speak up, right? So this was the third one. The fourth stage of grooming, the final stage, is maintaining control. By this stage, the access has been given to the child. There is trust that has been established. The boundaries have been tested and broken, and now that the abuser obviously doesn't want to be questioned, doesn't want anybody to get suspicious, so they maintain control. Now, how do they maintain control is something that I will talk about next. They maintain control so that the child doesn't disclose. So this brings us to our fourth fact, right? Children don't disclose abuse. I see a lot of parents are often surprised when I share this. They think we've taught them so much, we've spoken to them about body safety, etc. Of course they'll come and talk to us about it. It is not so simple. I took 20 years to disclose. I took 20 years to talk about my abuse, right? It's not that simple. The other thing here I want to talk about is that it's not a single time conversation. Disclosure is a process. So I want to give you an example here. So when I was growing up, and when I'd come back home from school, and suppose my parents would ask me, how's your school been, how was your day, and I would say, my teacher today hit these two boys. She slapped him because they were being so mischievous, etc. They were not listening. And I recall that my dad would say, if somebody ever tries to touch you like that, or anyone ever hurts you, then I'll kill them, or I'll do this, or and talk about such extreme steps. And so what happened was that as a child, it scared me that I don't want anybody to get hurt or harmed because of me. So as a parent, I know what we are trying to do is show our children that we care and they'll always be safe. We're always there to protect them. But when we exaggerate it like that, and although that is how we may genuinely feel, it scares and shuts down the child, and instead of then talking to you, they end up wanting to protect the other person who's actually harming them. So you don't, please be sensitive, deal with any disclosures very calmly. And it can shock you, it can make you feel sick in the stomach, but you need to deal with that in your own time, and it's not something that the child needs to be exposed to. Okay, so I'm glad I got that out of the way. So when we talk about children not disclosing, there are various reasons why a child may decide to not talk about it. One thing, like I said, is the tactics that an abuser uses, right? So some of the tactics that an abuser uses is they threaten the child, physical harm, or they may say that I'll hurt your pet, or I know you have a sibling, and if you talk about this, I'll do the same thing to your sister, or I'll do the same thing to your brother. So the child ends up wanting to protect that person, and then they stay quiet. Some other reasons why a child may not talk is because this is a difficult thing for people to understand. The abuser has, sometimes they filled an unfulfilled need, so they are actually close to the abuser, they care for the abuser, and so they often see that they don't want to lose that relationship, they don't want to lose that person from their life, and so they sometimes don't talk about it. The other reason can also be that they, like I said, they fear the reaction of the parents. They think maybe they won't be able to cope with the news. If it's a person they know, if somebody in the family, then that abuser may be in a position of power, and so they don't want to disrupt the family dynamic, they don't want to break the family, and so they take the burden upon themselves to keep the family intact. Okay, some other reasons why they may not talk about it is because they may also blame themselves. They may be scared also of not being believed. They may think, I was available, the abuser chose me, I was available, I was complicit in this behavior, and so there's such a strong feeling of shame and guilt that they can't talk about it. They don't want to be labeled as victims. They don't want to deal with the ramifications of public disclosure. Okay, so these are some of the reasons. If you can think of anything else, if you've read something else, please write. Let's discuss it further. uh, okay, so this brings us to our fifth point. Oops, can you read? Yes. Child sexual abuse impacts all aspects of a person's being. This is very important, because you have to understand that there are many social and health issues that we face as a community, as a society, and the root cause of many of this is child sexual abuse. So whether you may have experienced it or not, it is something that eventually ends up affecting you. Okay, so some of the research shows that some of the physical consequences of experiencing childhood sexual abuse could be obviously sometimes pregnancy. It could be very frequent and repeated urinary tract infections. It could be tear of the vaginal or anus area. It can also be bleeding, foul smell in the genitals. It could also be this is something that people don't often link it to, but it can cause psychosomatic illnesses. So things like gastrointestinal problems like irritable bowel syndrome, etc., can also be caused with a history of sexual abuse. Many girls even face irregular or very painful menstruation, right? So this is all related. They also found that children who have been victims are twice as likely to attempt suicide. So this is all very serious, right? They are also 30% more prone to medical illnesses such as cancer, heart disease, stroke, etc. So we just need to really try and spot and stop. In case the child has already been a victim, that is important to get counseling to get heal the survivor. Some of the other consequences that I want to discuss here are social consequences. So these, please remember, it can go either ways. Okay, they can be very extreme. So either a child, so you have to look at their normal behavior, their normal personality. Either a child can withdraw completely or become over pleasing and sort of put themselves out there. Sometimes they underdress. They want to just hide their frame, and they may wear dark clothing. They may basically try to, they don't want to be in the spotlight, they don't want to get attention on their body, so they may dress like that, or they may be overdressed, they may be trying to seek attention. They are also known to show sexual play. They are known to have sexualized behavior. Okay, some of the other things is there's drastic increase in aggression, in hostility. There's the grades are majorly affected. Also, academic performance drops in victims of child sexual abuse. Over a long-term period, they may even have aversion to intimate relationships. So these are some of the social consequences of being a victim. Now I want to talk about the psychological ramifications. So they may experience nightmares, sleep disturbances, eating disorders. Some older children may also show regressive behaviors like soiling their clothes, bedwetting, thumb sucking. So they're regressing. They suffer from low self-esteem and deep shame. So I hope I've given you some examples of things that they can go through, and you can see that they're from such different aspects of their life. And here I want to highlight the degree to which the child will get impacted depends on many factors. Some of it is the age of the abuse, relationship to the abuser, how supportive the environment is, have they been believed if they have disclosed. all of this really, if they receive a supportive environment and they are believed, then the recovery is faster, it's quicker. So I urge you to, sort of acquaint yourself and equip yourself to deal with this, so that the child can recover and heal from incest or child sexual abuse. So these were the five facts that I wanted to share with you. I hope that it's something that you've understood, and if there are any questions, I urge you to write them in the comment box, and I'm just going to conclude at this point. I'm sharing this information not so that you are alarmed. I don't want to scare you. I don't want to cause any panic. I'm sharing this so that you can keep your eyes open and you understand what is happening around you. Of course, we don't want to look at every kind family member with those judging eyes, and we don't want to look at every family member as a potential abuser. That is not what I'm saying here. What I'm trying to say is that you need to look out for behaviors, you need to look out for situations, and be vigilant, be alert, have communication, talk to your children. So for instance, when we talk about if I just go through the five, when we talk about it's not always force, talk to them about the various body safety rules, etc., because they cover a lot of different contact and non-contact offenses are spoken about there, right? When we talk about there's no checklist for offenders, let your child know that it could be anybody, somebody you know, somebody you trust, and even from them you can feel uncomfortable, right? When we talk about grooming, make sure that you tell your child to trust their gut, trust their instinct to talk to you if they feel weird or uncomfortable. When we talk about disclosure and how children don't disclose, then that as parents you need to be better equipped to deal with these things, right? So I hope that you get a good sense of this. I want to end on a positive note. In these last 5 years that I've been working on this, I've come across some fantastic teachers, counselors who have spotted it and reported it, who have healed and helped the survivor heal. I have also come across some fantastic organizations who are tirelessly working to spread awareness, to heal survivors, to spread awareness and empower citizens to be active bystanders. I have come across helplines, hotlines. I've come across very positive sort of behaviors to prevent child sexual abuse. Now that you know and you know the facts, the question is, what are you going to do about it? Thank you so much for your time. Stay safe. See you. Signing off. This is Anuja Amin, a mother to 2 daughters, an educator and a survivor of child sexual abuse. Thank you. Bye.